Hey guys, Monochrome here. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. Genuinely good to have you. Today I wanted to talk about a very important self-defense concept. And no, it's not going to be how to defend yourself against an attacker with a common pen. Although that is a subject I might cover in a future video sometime down the road. What I wanted to talk about is a much more important self-defense concept that really blows my mind, because there are so many people who just completely ignore it, or they have way the wrong mindset. Here's the simple version. You have individuals in real life who think that they can walk up to anyone, insult them, verbally humiliate them for any reason at all, maybe just for fun. And as long as they, the individual doing the verbal insulting, never makes the confrontation physical, then obviously the other individual won't make it physical either. Wrong. Dead wrong. And then, when the person doing the insulting gets punched, stabbed, or shot, they are genuinely surprised that the person they were insulting decided to ignore societal convention and make the verbal confrontation physical. They are genuinely shocked and surprised. And sometimes that's a lesson they learn the hard way. I mean, I'll never forget the true story of two mechanics who, one of them started verbally insulting another one. I don't remember the reason why. And the other one at first came back with verbal insults. And they started arguing back and forth. Well, eventually, the guy who started the whole thing ended up being stabbed just underneath the eye when the other mechanic pulled out a small pocket knife and decided to use it and decided to make the verbal confrontation physical. And the mechanic who actually started the entire verbal confrontation, he ended up dead because the blade went in underneath his eye and up into his brain. It's amazing that people have this utterly stupid mentality. I mean, it's one thing when you're dealing with some sort of pathetic keyboard warrior over the internet who tosses out insults and he knows there isn't anything you can physically do about it. That's one thing. But you have people who take that mentality and they try to apply it to real life because social convention, societal norms say if someone is verbally insulting you, you don't make the verbal confrontation physical. And meanwhile, what exactly is it that's separating those two individuals? Air. Literally air. You can't just stand there and verbally insult and humiliate someone standing next to you or standing a few feet away from you and honestly expect them to not be able to physically do something about it if they choose to. I mean, The person who's being verbally insulted, maybe he lost his job that day. Maybe his girlfriend left him after he put in a ton of effort into the relationship. Maybe a bunch of things happened. Maybe instead of just losing a girlfriend, he lost a parent that day. And obviously I don't mean one of his parents broke up with him. So sometimes you're dealing with someone whose mentality maybe at the present time really isn't where it should be. And here's someone being a jackass, being a jerk, verbally insulting them, and honestly expecting them not to do anything about it, except maybe throw a few verbal insults back at them. Well, societal convention, societal norms, all you've got separating you from the other guy is literally air. There's no physical barrier. There's no physical any type of protection. No physical anything to actually prevent the other individual from making it into a violent physical altercation instead of just an insulting verbal one. And it just amazes me, with my background in self-defense, it amazes me how widespread this problem is. You hear it on the news all the time. Two strangers out on the street, they get into a verbal altercation. The person who started the verbal altercation ends up getting physically assaulted, maybe even killed, and all because of some stupid verbal argument that honestly, not worth it. When it comes to advanced awareness and avoidance techniques, some things should be obvious. One of them being, if you want to avoid a physical confrontation that might land you in the hospital or the morgue or in a jail cell if you, quote, win, then one great way of avoiding something like that is don't get into horrendously insulting verbal arguments with a stranger that could easily escalate into a physical one. Maybe you yourself have no intention of going beyond the verbal. But when you're confronting a stranger, or sometimes even an acquaintance or a friend, you know, you never know what type of day they're having. You don't know if this individual is maybe well, hopefully if they're a friend or an acquaintance, you do know whether or not they're a convicted felon recently released from prison. But if it's a stranger, you don't know. And you can't go by looks alone. I mean, that stranger whom you're verbally confronting on the sidewalk, maybe he's a convicted felon who's been out for a while. Maybe he's done his best to reform. And sad to say, sometimes a person's best just isn't good enough. Maybe that convicted felon is working his butt off and he got fired. Well, He's no stranger to violence. Maybe that violent convicted felon got out and had no plans of reforming, just planned on going back to doing what he was doing that got him tossed into prison in the first place. And then here you come along because maybe he was checking his cell phone and accidentally bumped into you. So you toss out a few verbal insults. And maybe that convicted violent felon is having a really bad day, and he decides, hey, we're on an isolated side street. There's no one else around. And he decides to physically do something. I mean, you never know. If it's a stranger, you never know who you're confronting. It could be a perfectly normal human being. Perfectly normal human being going through a perfectly miserable, absolutely messed up day. Maybe the worst day of his life, and here you are, some stranger tossing insults his way, being a verbal jerk towards him for whatever reason, maybe just for fun. Yeah, people do that. So maybe this normally quiet individual who would just toss a few insults your way as well before walking on, or maybe he'd give you the finger before walking on. Maybe he decides, you know what, I've had enough, screw this, and he decides to physically do something about it. And the only thing preventing him from doing so is social convention, which is nothing more than air between the two of you. And I get it. Some people say, well, hold on. What about the police? Okay, there are a lot of individuals out there who will not make a verbal altercation into a physical one because they're afraid of going to jail. But again, the police aren't there at the moment, are they? No. The police show up later, and by that time it's too late. There are some people who aren't afraid of the police. There are some people who really don't give a damn that the police are going to show up later on and maybe take them into custody. So if there's a verbal altercation going on, it could turn physical at any second. And the police aren't there now to prevent it, are they? No. So what good are they at that moment? Guys, please keep this in mind. Police, some people just don't care. Any verbal argument could easily become a physical one, even if the person who started the verbal argument had no intention of themselves making it physical. Best not to argue with strangers at all. Okay guys, I'll see you in the next video. Please stay safe.